Welcome back to Clearly Ambiguous. Today we are tackling a question that has kept developmental economists screaming into their pillows since 1957. Why is it that when you hand someone free stuff, it does not automatically turn them into Singapore? Now, depending on which side of the political internet you inhabit, you probably think you already know the answer. If you lean left, direct social transfer are indisputable moral standard and the greatest invention since sliced bread. If you lean right, giving anyone $5 without a 40-page questionnaire will instantly destroy their work ethic and collapse civilization by Tuesday afternoon. Both sides are thoroughly convinced of their moral superiority. And both sides, as usual, are missing the actual structural mechanics of the problem. Enter economist named Harvey Leibenstein, or Leibenstein. I would like to call him Harvey Leibenstein. Back in 1957, Harvey looked at developing post-colonial nations and asked a simple question. Why do some poor nations stay poor even when foreign aid and government spending keep throwing money at them? To explain it, he came up with the critical minimum effort thesis. Harvey said, every economy has two forces constantly fighting each other. On one side, you have income-raising forces, such as investments, infrastructure, factories, and better technology, things that pull per capita income up. On the other side, you have income-depressing forces, population growth, inflation, social inertia, and unproductive consumption. Here is the catch. If your investment is small, if it is just a seasonal subsidy or a minor relief check, it raises per capita income temporarily. But because the effort was too small, the income-depressing forces swallow it whole. The population grows, prices go up, the money gets spent on short-term needs, and within a year, the entire economy snaps right back down to subsistence levels. It is the economic equivalent of trying to escape Earth's gravity with a pogo stick. You jump 3 feet into the air, feel great for a second, and then gravity reminds you that you did not build a rocket. And this brings us straight to the great modern freebie debate. Let us talk about consumption freebies. In modern politics, a freebie usually means a direct transfer designed purely for immediate spending. Free power, free grain, or direct monthly handouts with no strings attached. Governments love these. Why? Because building a power grid takes 10 years, 3 government agencies, and 6 environmental lawsuits. But sending a text message that says enjoy your gas voucher takes 5 minutes and wins an election next month. From a Leibenstein perspective, pure consumption handouts are the ultimate economic pogo stick. They push per capita spending up for a brief moment, and that's it. But because they do not build capacity, they do not build ports, train engineers, or create self-sustaining industries, they generate zero structural escape velocity. Once the budget runs out, you have not built a factory. You have just built a population that is entirely reliant on state to afford basic existence. The state gets trapped spending all its capital funding daily survival, leaving $0 for the massive infrastructure projects required to cross the critical minimum effort threshold. So case closed, right? Handouts are bad, capitalism wins, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, not so fast, because this is where the anti-freebie brigade stumbles into their own logical wall. There is a prevailing narrative that people stay poor simply because they want freebies. That if you give a struggling family unconditional cash, they will immediately spend it on flat-screen TVs and cheap liquor, forever abandoning hard labor. The problem with this theory is that it runs into something inconvenient called data. When researchers like Nobel laureates Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo studied direct cash transfer across dozens of developing countries, they found something weird. When you give poor people unconditional cash, work hours do not drop. Alcohol consumption does not skyrocket. You know what actually happens? People buy a cow. They fix their roof so rain stops ruining their tools. They buy a motorcycle so they can drive 2 hours to a town with actual jobs. They pay off high interest loans from the predatory local moneylenders. In other words, poor people are generally not stupid. They are just broke. If you are starving, sick with malaria, and walking 3 miles to fetch clean water every day, you're not failing to innovate because of a lack of ambition. You're failing to innovate because 100% of your cognitive capacity is consumed by surviving until 8 o'clock tonight. In economic terms, extreme poverty is a market failure. So, social safety nets, when designed correctly, do not create laziness. They act as a baseline trampoline that stops a sudden emergency from wiping out a family for an entire generation. So where does that leave us? If pure consumption handouts keep nations backward by draining state budgets, but social safety nets are required to keep citizens productive, what actually separates a transformative economic policy from state-sponsored bribe? It comes down to 3 structural realities that Liebenstein called indivisibilities. First, the indivisibility of capital. You cannot build half a bridge. You cannot build 20% of an electric grid. Either you make the massive concentrated investment required to connect a remote region to a global port, or you do not. Giving everyone in the village $10 a month feels nice. But if there is no paved road connecting that village to a market, that $10 just inflates the price of local tomatoes. Second, the indivisibility of demand. A shoemaker cannot survive in an isolated town where no one can afford shoes. For an economy to grow, multiple industries must grow simultaneously. So workers in one factory can become customers of another. That requires coordinated macro-level planning, not just throwing chump change at individuals and hoping the market magically resolves systematic isolation. Third, the indivisibility of human capital. Giving a child free meal at school is technically a freebie. But if that free meal ensures their brain develops properly, allows them to finish secondary education and eventually train as a technician, that is not consumption. That is a high-yield, long-term capital asset for the state. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Economic development does not care about your moral lectures. It does not care if you think poverty is a character flaw, and it does not care if you think social spending is inherently holy. Countries do not escape poverty because their citizens suddenly developed a heroic work ethic, and they do not stay poor simply because their citizens became addicted to state welfare. They escape poverty when the state stops using its revenues to finance tiny perpetual band-aids and instead accumulates the staggering concentrated critical effort needed to build real infrastructure, real institutions, and real human capability. If your policy is not crossing that threshold, you're not building a ladder out of poverty. You're just paying people to stay at the bottom of the pit. And on that cheerful note, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment telling me why economic takes are completely unhinged, and I will see you next week on Clearly Ambiguous. Maybe tomorrow, I have no idea. Thank you for watching.